All right, friends, it's time to give you loyal listeners a discount on protein powder. You may or may not know, but I launched my very first protein powder 2 years ago. It's a grass-fed beef isolate with only 3 ingredients: grass-fed beef, either organic cacao or organic vanilla, and organic monk fruit. Now, if you don't want any of the added flavor and sweeteners, you can also just get unflavored. And no matter what flavor you choose, you're getting over 23 grams of protein per scoop, which is going to keep you full and satisfied between meals. I love starting my day with a Fab4 smoothie and breaking my fast with that much protein. It makes a serious difference in my cravings and blood sugar balance the rest of the day, and I've seen it with my clients as well. Now, I never thought I'd own a product company, but when I got pregnant with Sebastian, I realized the majority of protein powders were chemically extracted or enzymatically extracted, and I wanted to use heat and water only. I wanted minimal ingredients because we don't need those emulsifiers, fillers, or added vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. All of those additions increase the chances that it's not going to work for your body, whether it be bloating, digestion issues. I just wanted pure, clean protein to keep you full and satisfied so you could build the most delicious Fab4 smoothie. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the flavor. If you take a look at our reviews on Amazon, you'll see 5-star reviews for flavor. And that is key, because if you don't love your Fab4 smoothie and you don't love drinking your protein powder, you're not going to do it. It won't become a habit, and it's consistency that outpaces everything. So if you're here and you're listening and you want to give our protein powder a try, use the code PODCAST5 for $5 off your order. And let me know if you love it. My favorite ways to apply this protein powder is in my Fab4 smoothie, making freezer fudge, making chocolate milk, making hot chocolate, and throwing the unflavored into all my kids' baked goods. So let me know how you use it. Let me know if you love it, and share this podcast deal with your friends. Welcome back to the show. Today's guest battled childhood leukemia. Dr. Lisa Koche began a lifelong mission to focus to find the cause of medical issues rather than just addressing symptoms. She attended Emory Medical School and completed her internal medicine residency at USF in Tampa. Lisa started her practice focusing on preventing cardiovascular diseases and obesity. That experience led to further training in alternative medicine, hormones, and nutrition. She is the medical director and founder of Spectra Wellness Solutions, a comprehensive clinic focusing on all aspects needed for total body healing, including the ketogenic diet, hormone replacement therapies, and enhancing mitochondrial function. Dr. Koche, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelly. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it is just mind-blowing to me that you had to deal with childhood leukemia. Can you tell your personal story before we jump into how your practice is helping people today?
Absolutely. And I like to say I was gifted with this diagnosis at 15 because it has led me to where we are. So I was feeling great, actually. No symptoms, went for a camp physical, and they pulled me out of my next class and sent me off. I went to the doctor to try to find out what was going on. So I was diagnosed at that point, went through 3 years of chemotherapy through the rest of high school, handled it really pretty well, other than the going to school with kind of a fat steroid face and a wig, which was not exactly the best look for a high school girl. But when I stayed out of the hospital and was able to make the best out of it. And then when I was in college, about to go into my junior year, I went for my first ever pap smear, which, as most women that are listening know, that is not exactly fun. And he stopped midway, and there was a mass on my ovary. So they thought it was a cyst, but in fact, it was hidden leukemic cells. So again, just as all of my hair had grown back, we had to go back into treatment again. So my parents were lucky enough to get me in at Sloan Kettering with a specialist. So I ended up having to move to New York City, and I was able to somehow take a class, go through chemo, lose all my hair again, and then go into heart failure after they had removed my ovary. The chemo was just hit a critical level, like a lifetime level, and my heart gave out at 20. So that was pretty scary. It did start my foray into combining traditional and integrative medicine, because at the time my uncle was a podiatrist and he started sending me supplements. And I didn't know what the heck they were, and they would come on auto ship, and I just took them. And they were CoQ10 and carnitine, which a lot of your listeners probably have heard of. So those are two of the most important supplements for mitochondrial function, which we'll talk about in a bit, and for your heart. So I did recover from that. Luckily, my heart went back to kind of low normal. I was able to run a 15K. I was able to finish undergrad, get into a really good medical school and start training. And I thought I wanted to go into treating kids with childhood leukemia because I had wanted to share I was so blessed and how could I give back? And my very first interview for medical school, the doctor looked at me and said, "Do you really want to do that?" And I just was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "You really want to treat this all day?" And then I said, "Oh, no, I don't. I want to prevent it." So that was kind of like a pivoting point where I was like, why was I thinking that? So went into internal medicine and prevention of cardiovascular diseases because it kind of seemed like the biggest thing to prevent, that was out there at that time if I didn't want to do direct cancer. And that's how I got on my path of obesity treatment and brought in nutrition and eventually started studying functional medicine. And when I had my daughter, nobody thought I could really get pregnant. We didn't know because I'd had all that chemo in one ovary, was able to get pregnant on the first try. And after I had her, which I did okay, my heart actually held up. I got Hashimoto's, psoriasis. I couldn't open my eyes. They were hurting. They told me I needed eye surgery. I got sinus problems, had to have sinus surgery. So things blew up with my immune system. And I was already, out of the box, questioning the narrative. That has always been my MO, because if I had just accepted, I wouldn't be sitting here today. At the time, my friend was going to close her practice. She had been to Arizona to see a guru, some big clinic out there, because she was exhausted. And they told her that we have a guru in Clearwater, which is real close to Tampa, and he did muscle testing. So if your listeners have heard of that, it's a very Eastern medicine technique. It's where you just basically touch on different points and can push on the arm. And I said, why not? My labs were normal and I knew I felt terrible. I had gone to the endocrinologist. I had done everything that I was supposed to do. I was eating clean. I was, taking supplements, and he did the muscle testing head to toe. And as I was sitting there going, you've got to be kidding me. Can't be this easy. When we were done, he sat me across the desk from him and just looked at me and said, "How are you functioning?" That was the only the only sentence or question. And so I was like, I have a baby, I have a practice, type A tax attorney husband, I'm functioning. And he said, "Well, you must feel like absolute garbage." So I started crying because it was finally, somebody is able to see what I feel. And he put me on a ton of different supplements and I started feeling better. So that was another huge pivot point. He's now full-time in my practice with me. We heal people side by side, which is really beautiful. And then I brought in another healer who does some other work with the upper cervical C-spine, tapping it in with a sound wave and doing energy work. Because since that time, my daughter now is almost 18. I have navigated other issues. So I really wanted another kid. My body was too messed up to do it. We waited. I was able to have my son without fertility, 5 years of chemo, one ovary at 41. So
wow.
I know, it's crazy. My heart did give out at the end of that pregnancy. So my boy was delivered with general cardiac anesthesia. So that was a little scary because my heart kind of couldn't handle the volume with the second pregnancy. And so since that time, and he's almost 10, I have navigated different issues with my heart predominantly. And that has been another big part of my journey. As recently as 4 years ago, I went into early menopause from stress and the one ovary in my history. And about 3 months later, I couldn't walk. So my heart ended up giving out again. And each pregnancy, I could run the 15K. Then after my daughter, I could only run a 5K. After my son, I could only walk, run. And I was sort of in denial, doing what a lot of your listeners, I'm sure, do, which is take care of everybody else. Mm-hmm. People pleasing, taking care of everybody else, doing the healer magic that actually can be detrimental. And when I was laying in the hospital bed and the transplant doctor was in the room, so it was that bad, I asked, what is this about? What else am I supposed to learn? All I do is heal people. What do you want? And the message was, you're not healing you. So the last 4 years have been even more about the spiritual journey to healing and trying to show how it connects directly to the physical and the science. And I can happily say today that my heart is better than it was 20 years ago. I did get out I did have to have a pacemaker put in my chest. So that was a little bit scary at the time, but I can do everything that I want to do. And I've been able to bring all of my gifts that I've collected along this journey and share with my patients and my followers and my book and all of that. So that's the nutshell.
So beautiful that you have, it seems like, kept a really positive disposition through all of this turmoil and trauma and pain to come out the other side. I wish people could see what I see, which is this like bright light of who you are coming through the screen. You're very vibrant. You wouldn't know that you had such a checkered and diseased past. It's really beautiful to see. So I would love to go a little bit deeper. I do have a couple follow-up questions on your story, just because I'm a mom of young children. And I think as a lot of moms, you don't think that your kid will ever have cancer. And it's a really scary thing to think about. What was the sign that the nurse at school found that they said, all right, Lisa, it's time to go get follow-up?
Okay, so 2 quick things I will say in response to that. So first of all, there was no sign. It was a camp physical. So it was in my blood work.
Okay.
I felt fine. So my parents would never have noticed it because it was kind of a gradual decline in my blood count. And I was able to compensate and function pretty much normally. And I'll just throw in the power of thoughts and words and like just putting energy more into keeping a healthy, diet for the kids and keeping pesticides and, things out of the house that limiting exposures in a way that's not over the top instead of kind of looking for signs, if that makes sense.
I love it. Keep it positive. Know that the chances are low. And if you put your energy into prevention, that's the best way to go.
Totally.
Okay. Another follow-up question. Muscle testing. It's been something that I've had done personally, and I don't understand the science behind it. And I need you to clarify it for us and our listeners.
Okay, great. So here's how
our listeners.
Okay, great. So here's how I explain it to people. There is no hardcore evidence-based science. There's just not. But if you're going to be using supplements anyway, and you have a healer that's pretty experienced in doing this technique, I have found it to be invaluable. So how I explain it is that the way it's kind of like if I tap on your knee and you kick, right? It's a reflex, which is involuntary and automatic. It's a reflex, but it's between your energy field. So we all have a physical body, but then we have an energy field that's coming off of our body. You have maybe heard people talk about chi or chakras and auras. And we've always kind of been like, well, that's for the weirdos, or that's that. We don't have that. Nobody really talks about it very much in this, especially in our culture, but in other cultures, it's pretty front and center, in India and in China. So we can actually, turns out, take devices that can measure this energy field coming off of the body. So more and more of the science is coming out on this. Muscle testing is a way to evaluate the connection between the two. So we actually use the energy field and how it's connected to the physical through this reflex. So I tell people, and all your listeners can try this, so you can try it at home, because otherwise it looks like it's almost like a gimmick, to sell vitamins or whatever it looks like. Because sometimes you'll see people in the mall and they like put on this strap and then they test. So it has been overused. It has been used by people who don't really have pure intent. So that's a big piece. It's got to be a healer with pure intent, and the patient needs to be open. If they just think it's completely BS and like are doubting the whole thing, it will impact the results, because thoughts are an energy frequency. So I tell people at home, get your partner, friend, kid to push on your arms. You can hold your arms straight in front of you, have them push, and then bring something in your energy field that's not good for you. So it could be a cell phone. It could be sugar. It could be like a diet soda. Hold it right up to the body, and then let the person push your arm again, and you will not be able to resist them. So it looks like a party trick, like literally like a party trick. But a lot of times if my patients try that, they see that there's this reflex we didn't really know was there. So we actually will use it. Me and my naturopath, I just do very basic, but he's done this for 40 years. And he will pull on the arm while he's touching acupuncture points. if the energy is, and the practitioner is a conduit. So if the energy coming from the acupuncture point is doing great, as a general rule, the muscle stays strong. If there's any kind of issue, the muscle will go weak. And I tell people you could be Hulk or you could be an old lady because it has nothing to do with your muscle mass. It is actually a nerve reflex, just like the knee kicking is a nerve reflex. So that's kind of the general overview. It's a little bit hard to kind of grasp the concept without seeing it, but trying it at home, a lot of people will get a kick out of that. So
I love it. For everyone listening, definitely give yourself a little muscle test. And if you're interested, definitely find someone with pure intent. Let's go into what I think is a really powerful question. I know you'll have some phenomenal answers for. What do you think the largest root cause issues of disease are today and that are often overlooked?
I love that question. I would say, I know you talk about a lot, which is the gut. So that is the health and status of your gut. And a lot of times is probably number one. A lot of times people feel like, especially if they're having normal bowel movements, which by the way, for your listeners, most of my patients don't know what that is. So 1 to 2 formed stools a day. That's a normal bowel movement. So, oh no, I poop once a week, but that's been forever. That's not okay. Or I go every 3 days. I'm not worried about it. I hear all of that. So 1 to 2 formed stools a day. So a lot of us, whether it's because of early childhood antibiotics, Advil, alcohol, processed foods, most people do not have a totally healthy gut lining. And when that is out of balance, your immune system gets impacted, your liver gets overloaded, you don't digest your food right. So I'd say that's number one.
Awesome. Well, let's go into how we can take care of our gut and eat to support gut health. You've been known to talk about the ketogenic diet and mitochondrial health. Let's get into how you work with clients and what you prescribe when it comes to a day-to-day healthy eating plan.
So for a healthy eating plan, I will say this in terms of the gut, just real quick. Even if you're eating super clean, if you don't address the lining of the intestine, you can start reacting to things and not even realize it. That could be organic spinach. So getting that health and status and lining and everything healed in the bowel is really important. A clean diet is going to make all the difference in the world. So you can probably function pretty well even with leaky gut or gut issues if you're eating clean enough. But if you really want to heal and get to this next level of function, we got to get both going. So what I'll tell patients first, because a lot of times they'll come in and they're still eating, a pretty significantly high carb diet, a standard diet, is just we start with my top two things, which is gluten and sugar. So they're both so chemically processed at this point, and especially the gluten. It is not a fad. It is being grown with glyphosate and the different crop manipulation. And what's happening is patients, a large percentage of patients are reacting to it without even knowing. So I just tell them, can you give me 2 to 3 weeks? Like, you're not sacrificing never eating a piece of cake again. Like, just give me 2 to 3 weeks, but you've got to be meticulous because the antibodies will not go away if you're having a subtle reaction to gluten unless you have complete avoidance for 2 to 3 weeks, and then go out and eat it. And you would be shocked. So I have them remove gluten and then any added sugar. You would be shocked at how many people will come back and say, A, it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. And B, oh my God, I feel so much better. So, like whether it's joint pain or I can see my cheekbones again, or my rings aren't tight, these kinds of things like really show up even just with that mild dietary change. So that's how I start. And then a lot of my patients will, if they're inflamed, just being aware of total carb intake is really important. So getting them on an app like MyFitnessPal, which is a free one on your phone, and just getting awareness of how many carbs maybe you eat in a day. And sometimes it's way higher than people realize. And the quick acting carbs that don't have a lot of nutritional value, that'll be the next thing that I work on, is kind of getting those out of the diet. And then we'll play around with things like dairy and eggs, which are also highly allergenic in a lot of people. So it just depends on what the complaints are and what we're trying to achieve, where I'll go, which steps I'll take next.
When you are seeing your clients in your practice, what are some of the most common complaints?
So number one, by far, fatigue. Yeah. So almost everybody, if you look around, I mean, the vibrance, and we explain, we explain it away. Oh, it must be because I just turned 35. Okay, no, that's not okay. Oh, I just had a baby 6 months ago, and maybe, that does take some recovery time. Or I have a reason, I don't sleep well. Okay, well, that's not okay either. So we actually have this ability, and I'll tell you something really cool, which is, it's only been the past maybe year and a half that I realized there's not just a journey towards healing. So we have a journey towards healing where we want to be able to stay up and function, wake up in the morning and feel like we slept and still be okay, like at 10:30 at night. Like that's a big goal. And that is probably the goal for most of the people listening here. But it turns out there's actually a goal that you can peek over the edge of that, and that's performance. It's resiliency. So there's actually like a next phase, which I am now playing with, which involves things like our mitochondria, which involves ways to kind of bring that out in us, including certain dietary plans, which you asked. So things like the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting can actually help us, especially when we cross over from that healing into that performance zone.
Well, that's where I know all of us and all of my listeners want to be, especially me with a 3-month-old baby. So oh
my God, you look amazing.
Let's talk about mitochondria, because these are energy producing powerhouses. And then we'll layer on top how the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting can support mitochondrial function.
And a lot of other really cool toys as well, not just the food. There are other things we can do for mitochondria, like light therapy that we can mention as well.
Okay. So start with the basics though. Like what are mitochondria? What are they doing? Where do they live? How do we make more of them? All the good stuff.
So a couple of great stories with regards to that. But basically mitochondria you can view them as the engines. They sit inside all of our cells except the red cell. They're more concentrated in our brain and our heart and our muscles, things that need the most energy to work appropriately. So what they do is they take electrons from the food that we eat. So it'll take the food and take an electron off of it, which is a particle that gives energy, and oxygen from the air that we breathe, combine them in this complicated step of reactions and spit out an energy molecule called ATP. So that's kind of like the fuel that will go in and fuel all of the actions that we do in our body. So we learned what's really interesting about mitochondria is most of your listeners have probably heard of them because we learn about them in like 8th or 9th grade biology. And it's really crazy, but they don't really go there again. Like ever. Okay. Yeah. So we learn about it. Like, I don't remember really studying it in college other than again in biology. And it's just like, you memorize what it looks like. And then in med school, it's like only some severe rare diseases, but it turns out that mitochondria are most likely the link as to why every human is walking around tired right now. So they were, another couple of interesting points about them is they were their own bacteria. So mitochondria were on this planet way before we were. And they were like literally functioning using sunlight and using different things to have an existence. Whatever that existence wasn't much. But what happened is somehow the beginning of the human being was able to kind of hijack the mitochondria or this bacteria and put it inside of our cells as an engine. So it actually has its own DNA, which is really kind of crazy, separate from our DNA. So they call it mitochondrial DNA. So these things we're still trying to understand, but it was a foreign bacteria that was able to exist on its own. So when you start looking at it, there's some really interesting nuances because of that, which is, it was able to sense its environment. So the mitochondria is very sensitive to if we are stressed. Like, because it was programmed to be able to sense that. It was also very sensitive to light. So we keep unfolding more and more information about them. And one really cool story is that my daughter was in 8th grade and she would ask me occasionally to quiz her on stuff. And this one day she was like, "Mom, I need you to help me, quiz me." And I said, "Please don't be history. Please don't be history." Because the history was like always so complicated and boring for me. And she was like, "No, it's biology and it's mitochondria." So I was like, "Oh, heck yeah." Because I am like trying to learn this again anyway. So she hands me this packet of papers, and the first like 10 pages that I'm quizzing her on were all the leaf, like it was the plant. So I said to her, Jordan, you told me this was mitochondria. It's a plant. And she goes, Mom, they're the same. What's the big deal? And I was like, what? So I take a look closer, and it's the chloroplast, which you may have heard of if you remember again from biology. The chloroplast is what takes the light and the soil and all the stuff, the nutrients, and helps the plant make energy. And sitting there next to it is the mitochondria, and they literally look exactly the same. So I just was like, now, isn't that interesting? And I just kind of I have this like file in my brain of things that I know are going to come back, but I don't know what the heck to make of it at that time. And I think it was 6 months later, I was in my car and there was a podcast on, and I was listening to this somewhat controversial neurosurgeon who's not politically correct, likes to use lots of curse words, he's hysterical, who had been a paleo guy. He had tried a lot of different diets to lose weight and he couldn't get it off. And then he finally started studying how the lights in the operating room,
Jack.
Yes. And all of this stuff was impacting him. And he got out of there and he started to lose weight. So while he was teaching about this, he literally said, people, wake the F up. The mitochondria and the chloroplast are exactly the same. So I was driving. So I was like, I know that. I saw that before. Like I'm talking to myself like, oh. So anyway, that was another like kind of interesting pivot point for me too, where I said, wait, we don't really understand these vessels and this body that we have been gifted. We're just starting to get it.
Wow. Pretty amazing. So let's talk about the effect of that light has on mitochondria and how we're maybe breaking down our mitochondria or not keeping them healthy with light.
Yeah. So we have this gift, which I did not realize until I started studying the ketogenic diet, which I know we want to get to, that I thought we were born with a certain number of mitochondria. And if they died off, that was it. And it turns out that the mitochondria are very sensitive, like we said, to light, and they prefer sunlight and they prefer circadian rhythm of light. They don't do well with consistent blue light, fluorescent light, things coming out of our screens and our phones. And by not doing well, like literally they can die off, or they can have a slower function, a decreased ability to make energy. And it turns out that not only we're not stuck with what we are born with. So that's the part that's been really fascinating and exciting, is that you can actually make brand new mitochondria. So in addition to understanding some of the ways that they die off, and mitigating those, whether it's like using blue light blocking glasses while you're on your computer or making sure to get sun exposure, especially in the morning, those are really great hacks. You can also do things to sort of help trigger the formation of new ones, which can include things like, again, the right light therapy, the ketogenic diet.
So let's talk about light therapy. What should people be using if they're interested in starting some light therapy? And then we'll jump into keto.
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, take a look at your surroundings. So making sure that you can easily set like night shift on your phone to just decrease some of that all day blue exposure, and on your computer. Using blue light blocking glasses will help if you're really working. So many people working from home and are stuck on devices at this point. I've had patients with migraines and fatigue and other symptomatology get dramatically better just by filtering some of that light out. So the light question has two parts, which is like what lights to avoid. So fluorescent, LEDs, and blue light, and excessive computer and phone exposure. And then the right kind of lights, which is more incandescent, like old-fashioned light bulbs and sunlight. And so especially the morning exposure before 10 a.m. has a really good broad rays that our mitochondria prefer. So I try to get my patients outside for about 10 minutes. Ideally, they're doing some grounding, so putting their feet in the earth and letting the sun in their eyes. And that was one thing Dr. Cruz actually identified was the entry path for the light for humans is a lot through your eyes. So if you don't want to stare right at the sun, but if you can be outside without sunglasses without glasses. So, people, your listeners that wear contacts and glasses, that they can go outside before they put their contacts in, or, go outside with their glasses and take them off for about 10 minutes. It can make a really big difference in how you feel.
Definitely. I love that. I've been trying to have my coffee outside in our backyard, play a little soccer with my son, Sebastian, who's 2, almost 2.5.
Oh, cute.
So that's like he's up with the sun. So we're out there, but,
that's great. And then the one other thing we didn't talk about which is red light therapy. So that is also an evolving science, and the idea of the fact that we tend to be deficient in red light. And there are devices now on the market that can emit both red and near infrared, which are known to be really good for everything from the formation of new mitochondria. So energy, focus, skin, and inflammation, and you just have to stand in front of this red light, and actually it feels really good, and it will kind of like load up in your cells, and then over time kind of help with the mitochondrial function.
I love it. If anyone has an infrared sauna at home, one of the best things is they have those you can basically put those panels on the inside to get a twofer, little infrared heat plus some red light therapy, and you're good to go. Do you have a favorite brand?
So from a pure red light, it's called Red Light Co. So that is a good company. And then the saunas, Sunlighten or Therasana. So the infrareds work a little bit differently because they help the mitochondria more from a detoxification standpoint. So when you look at what helps mitochondria, we talked about light, and we're going to talk about food and things, but we also always want to look at what's hurting them. The other thing that hurts them is toxins. So in addition to like the blue lights and things, is environmental toxins, lots of different toxins, heavy metals, things that everybody is exposed to, antibiotics, drugs of any sort. Over time, it gets worse as we get a little bit older because we have more exposure. The nice thing about infrared saunas is they penetrate deep enough to access really deep-seated chemicals that are kind of stuck by our organs. And then these chemicals can come out in the sweat. So that indirectly is going to really help mitochondrial function by decreasing the load on them.
I love it. So let's get into the ketogenic diet, because I know that is something that everyone can probably start incorporating if they're interested in supporting their mitochondrial function without having to go buy a red light therapy or a sauna or all that.
Right, totally. And actually the red light has come down in price over time, which is really nice. But for what happened with the ketogenic diet, so this was probably about 8 or 9 years ago now, it was not on any grocery shelf. I have this innate ability to like find things 10 years before they become crazy. So I was researching, I was tired of my patients being on the same, broccoli and dried grilled chicken diets. And I was trying, I was trying to find like hiring a nutritionist to work with, or new recipes, or just something to mix things up. And I was searching, and I was looking at, and all of a sudden it popped up, ketogenic diet and mitochondria. And I was like, whoa, what's that? Like, I didn't know what it was. And it was Dr. Mercola, who a lot of your listeners have probably heard of. He's like one of the, forefathers of integrative medicine, talking to Dr. D'Agostino, who was a researcher. So he was interviewing him, talking about how the ketogenic diet has the ability to do a lot of different things. But one of them was it triggers mitochondrial biogenesis. And all that fancy word means is what I said before, you can make new ones. So eating that way, which was bringing your carbs way down, but also supplementing with fat instead of just nothing, or more protein, was training the body to make new mitochondria. So I was like, wait, what? I was looking for something interesting food-wise. And then the next thing out of the guy's mouth was, well, at my lab at the University of South Florida, okay, I dropped my pencil because first of all, I didn't know you could make new mitochondria, and I was struggling with my heart. Second of all, I lived 10 minutes from there. So I was like, hold on, what did he say? So I was like rewinding and playing it again. So in my typical way, I picked up the phone and I said, I saw you on a recording. I'd love to hear what you're doing. So I went and toured the lab with him, and his lab was all with rats being fed the ketogenic diet and the benefits they were getting on energy production and on, ability to do tasks and all these different things. And I was blown away. So I started the program supervised, because at that point, everyone was freaked out about fat, and we're getting more used to it now. But I think, can't remember how many people probably went through my program, maybe 30 or 40, not a ton, but with a supervised 8 to 12 week program. And I watched what was happening. So we brought the carbs way down. We supplemented with different, nutraceuticals, greens, powdered proteins, using some of the fatty coffees, and the patients were getting better. And what was really, really interesting is not only was their energy getting better, their focus getting better, but they were more present. Like, I don't know if it's just because they felt better and the clarity was there, but like people would come in and they were like, I feel so much better. I realized I can't stay on my job. Or one guy dropped out and said, I just noticed I'm an alcoholic. And then one other person was like, I think I'm getting a divorce. So it was really just like something nuanced that I noticed with this, that it was like pushing people in a different way. So that's something, the spiritual side of keto, which is pretty interesting. Like, just again, clarity that comes as we do this. So I ended up having different forms of it, and coming out in my book, what I offered was a 3-pronged approach, because it turns out that most people and a lot of women don't do well with staying long-term in a state of ketosis. You can get a ton of benefit just by doing it, even for 6 weeks, if it seems to work. If you start it and you don't feel good, if you start it, you're having a lot of abdominal discomfort. There is a subset of the population that maybe doesn't digest fat very well. They don't do quite as well with the ketogenic diet. But if you do well and you feel good, that 6 weeks, it's almost like you're going into a training program for what I like to call metabolic flexibility. So that's the ability at the cellular level, at the mitochondrial level, to use either carbohydrates or fats as fuel. So that training of like teaching the body, hey, we know you can grab a carb anywhere and everywhere that you go, but like, let's just try this and see how you feel. So doing that hardcore 6 week of predominantly good fats, and you do have to be very careful how you keto. Like, there's a lot of dirty ways to do it with processed meats and, like just pork rinds and like things that are not gonna give the desired impact, because they're gonna cause inflammation and other problems. But if you do it in a clean way, which it can even be done vegan at this point, which most of your listeners, I'm sure, have seen all the varieties that are out there. If you give it a try and the body can taste what it feels like to be in a state of ketosis, I can tell you, even for me, I did it probably hardcore for a couple of months at the beginning. And then since that time, I do more of an intuitive, where I'm mostly in ketosis, but I eat carbs in the evening. And a lot of women will play with their cycle. So when they are, in that pre-cycle period, right, when their luteal phase and their progesterone is starting to come down, like you need some more carbs. So some people have written all kinds of different ways to play with a carb intake with your periods. That's helpful. So I think finding that individualized keto is really, really important. And you can do a very low carb, meaning below 50, and still get pretty phenomenal results, and even 75. So a lot of it has to do with your listeners, where you're starting right now. So like, if you track on MyFitnessPal and you're taking in 150 to 200 grams of carbs a day, you don't want to go to 20. Like, that's not a recipe for success. I would strongly recommend maybe you try to go to like under 175 and get out some of the quick acting sugars and gluten and carbs first. So we do it in steps.
It resonates with me so strongly when you talk about clarity, when you talk about energy, and really when you talk about that spiritual moment for people, because I think what I've seen in my practice is that there's a lot of self-soothing with food, a lot of comfort with food. And when you pull away the need for food comfort because you're leaning into a ketogenic diet and you don't feel hungry and you feel calm and relaxed, and you can start to sit with your emotions and your feelings and your thoughts without self-medicating, it kind of gives you the space to feel and process what you're going through.
Yeah. And I love what you just said, because that exact statement is also what COVID has done.
It absolutely has.
Yeah. Like word for word, the space, the clarity, because we're not having all this craziness around us. With keto, you're not having the craziness of the inflammatory food and the emotional eating and all of that. So a lot of really interesting parallels there.
Definitely. Well, let's go a little bit deeper. Your book is called Get Lit. What can our listeners expect to learn from it?
So I wrote that book in a Q&A format so that people could get it knocked out in a pretty easy, quick way. It's simple to read. It goes into body, fuel, and mind. So I really just address the top areas that I heal in the body. I give different tips from supplements to hydration to things to discuss with your physician. The fuel goes into the 3-tiered approach of carb restriction, but also I look at also dim versus lit foods. I talk about how certain foods are a lot more inflammatory. Certain foods have extra punch to them, extra benefits, some of which are things like carrying more light in the body, by the way, which is pretty interesting. Things like chlorella and spirulina. And then the mind piece is so important. So in the book, I came up with something called the Lit scale. And I have patients think or readers think about self-care, thoughts, and relationships. And I have it ranked from dim to lit. And then there's an affirmation where wherever you are, we don't judge, we just kind of observe, an affirmation that you can say every day to help you kind of go up the scale. So that the mindset and some other tools that are some of my favorites, like soaking in Epsom and the grounding and meditation.
I love it. Well, we definitely all want to be more lit than dim. That's for sure. Let's get up on that lit scale. So what are some daily practices that you recommend? I know you've given a lot on the podcast thus far, but to our listeners that you may not have talked about that are present in the Get Lit book.
I would touch on hydration. So when we talk about, if we view also, we both have our water here. We have to practice what we preach. Cheers. Water is really fascinating because it's actually alive. People think of it as just kind of flat, but you can do things with your water to make it more impactful and stay in your cells longer. So one of which is as simple as adding a half a lemon to each liter. So every kind of liter that I drink has a half a lemon and some sea salt in, and it really will hold my levels of hydration a lot more effectively than just drinking straight flat water. And especially if you're doing things like reverse osmosis, which is the easiest way to clean the water, it doesn't have a lot of charge to it, and it's a little bit more flat. So you might want to add minerals.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of adding electrolytes, sodium, magnesium, potassium, just pure to my water. And I find a complete difference in my hydration levels more than anything else. It's been a total game changer for me personally. So I'm excited to learn more about that. Yeah. All right. Well, before we head out today, I just want to go a little bit deeper into mindfulness practices that you recommend for your clients, because as you stated earlier in the podcast, what we think, our thoughts have energy, and you have brought in the spiritual side so much in your practice. East meets West. So what are some things that you think are best practices when it comes to mindfulness?
So I would say the first thing is making sure it's overstated all the time, meditation, but I find in my practice, a lot of people don't really know what it is. They haven't given it a true try, or they will immediately say, oh, I tried that. I can't calm my mind down. And it's like pushed over to the side. So what it is the ability to just be. People also confuse it with prayer. So they think if they're reading the Bible or doing devotional or saying prayers, that's meditation. And it's actually a very significant difference. So when you're praying, you're still active. I tell people you're still giving, like you're giving thanks, or you're giving your energy to read, giving your energy to speak. When you're meditating, you are receiving. So it is a place where you can try to calm so that you can receive. So the easiest way for people to do it is just literally go on YouTube, type in guided meditation. There's hundreds of free ones and it takes practice. So trying it a couple of times and saying, I couldn't calm down. Well, most people can't, most people can't just sit there. We're constantly stimulated. So there's a couple that I like, the Honest guys. They're pretty nice. They're easy, basic. There's hundreds of free ones. Hit play. Get outside, maybe, like you said, feet in the earth. It's a little hard with a 2-year-old, but if you find that 10 minutes to just breathe and listen, that's when I tell people, they tell me they don't know how to do it. I'll just say, can you breathe and can you hit play on YouTube? Because that's all you got to do to be able to be meditating. And the more you try it, the more you'll touch this space in you that is just neutral. It's calm. And if you can go there, you can learn to kind of control your reactivity to anything, really. So that is the first tool by far, is just having people even give me 5 minutes of a pause. A lot of times people will use alcohol, and especially in COVID, to calm themselves down. And I find another really good tool to let people know, I will ask them and I'll say, if you're comfortable with where you are on your own kind of spiritual journey, stepping into your own power, if you're good, then go drink. If you want to step into more ability to manifest things that you want in your life, if you want to release past trauma, if you want better relationships, that emotion that's coming up in a lot of us to trigger us to want to drink, or to trigger us to want to scroll on our phone, or to trigger us to any of these behaviors, is coming up for a reason. And typically it's to be sat with, felt, and released. That would probably be another big kind of nugget for people, is think about just trying, and whatever way it is, to back off a little bit. And maybe instead of 2 glasses, you have 1 while you're grounding outside. Find some kind of happy medium to get things moving again.
So empowering and just thought-provoking, I think, because people have become really sober curious. And as a new mom, I've had a couple years before Sebastian, all the way through to now, where I've been a couple dozen drinks in total. It's a little bit, it's planned pregnancy, so it's a planned sobriety. And it is amazing when you are coming back from that, and I have the ability to drink now. I'm breastfeeding, but if I wanted one, I could have a glass of wine. And when you go that long without it, it's almost like the want and the need goes away.
Yeah. And maybe it's it doesn't mean not to ever drink. If you're at a great restaurant and you just want the taste of it, or you want to loosen up because you're going out with friends, I think it's more the reason. So if you can explain it, I am just deciding I want this because I'm having a nice meal. That's just even having that conversation. Again, I'm all about the critical thinking skills. So have that conversation with yourself.
I love it. Well, we end every podcast the same, and we end it with, what does body love mean to you?
Oh, I love that. So body love means letting go of the self-judgment that almost everybody has, being willing to look into baby steps on just taking a step of any sort towards all of these great things we've talked about today. You're not going to be a lean, keto, grounding, meditation guru tomorrow. But hey, maybe you can play a guided meditation for 5 minutes. And that's loving your body. And then having gratitude for it as well. Maybe running. One thing I like to do is right when I wake up, just running some love and gratitude through. I start at my feet and work all the way up. So just thank your body.
I love that. I love that you're giving people the advice to take those baby steps, because it can always feel really overwhelming to learn a bunch of new things and how you can completely change your life. But the reality is it takes effort and it's step by step. So thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Koche. Tell everyone where they can find your book, follow along with you, and where they can find your practice.
Awesome. So my book is on Amazon. It's also on my website, spectrawellness.com or drlisacoach.com, and my Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Lisa Coach.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. That was so much fun.
It was awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Be Well by Kelly. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more at bewellbykelly.com and follow me on Instagram at bewellbykelly. I would love if you picked up my books, Body Love and Body Love Every Day. They're sold on Amazon and at all major booksellers.